With that, we go to our next speaker. Trae Stevens is a partner at Founders Fund, and he invests across various different sectors with a particular interest in startups operating in the government space. He's also a co-founder and executive chairman of Anduril Industries, a defense technology company focused on autonomous systems. And I may add, a company that has demonstrated one of the coolest drones around that you can look up in the internet. It's really, really super amazing what they've been coming up with. And before that, he was an early employee at the secretive company Palantir, where he led teams focused on growth. And prior to that, he has worked as a computational linguist focusing on Arabic and Persian within the United States intelligence community. His talk is entitled, "What Happened to the Future?" Please welcome Trae Stevens.
Hi, good morning, good evening, whatever time zone it is for whoever is watching across the world. Thank you to the organizers of Techsylvania for having me. And I realize I'm kind of wedged in this very interesting spot between Ryan from Summit and Daniel from UiPath. So in 15 minutes, you guys get to hear from probably like the most interesting tech entrepreneur from Romania in the last 10 years. So that should be really exciting, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say. For the moderators in Techsylvania, I'm not sure if the slides are up. There we go. Cool. So today I want to kind of go over three things. The first thing I want to talk about is human psychology. The second thing I want to talk about is history, and the third thing I want to talk about is the future. And I'll hope to tie all of those things together. The first piece of this is actually super relevant to what Ryan just left off with at the end of his talk, when he was mentioning that there are all of these trade-offs that you get with some of the most prolific tech founders in modern history, people like Elon Musk and Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Bill Gates, Peter Thiel, who I work with at Founders Fund, Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs. Oftentimes people will reference that they're just kind of bizarre people, and I think that this is weirdly an advantage for them. And there's a lot of like clinical psychology that goes into this about how some of these founders are what we would call as Asperger's, or on the autism spectrum. And Simon Baron-Cohen was quoted saying, "A typical child might just accept, okay, this is just the way that it's done. This is how we do things in our culture or family." While someone with autism or Asperger's, they would ask why questions. They want logical answers. Just saying we do this because everybody else does this doesn't really meet their test of logic. So I think this is kind of like a core concept in human psychology that's actually super relevant to the startup space. Humans are mob creatures. We copy what other people do. We copy things that have worked in the past. And these behaviors lead us to have like kind of business school like dynamics in the way that we think about startups. And so I'll walk through a couple of examples of this. So when Square first came out, it's like this really cool payment system that allows you to like use a mobile device to process a credit card transaction. And this was shortly followed by PayPal releasing a triangle, and Intuit releasing a cylinder, and Spark releasing a rectangle. And like our imagination was like really limited to just like, how can we copy this thing that has demonstrably worked in order to build something that we can kind of monetize on top of the history of something working. Another example of this that's maybe even more scary is food delivery. This is a short sampling of companies that have been started in the food delivery space. And oftentimes when from a venture capital perspective, when you meet with these companies, the type of defense that you hear about the competition question is, well, the previous success of these other companies validates the need for the products that we're building. But the real challenge with this is that competition competes all the capital away. And so very few of these companies succeeded or are still alive. And those that did tended to kind of monopolize the gains that trickled back to the investors. So, the third example that I would mention here is the RSA conference, which is like the big cybersecurity conference that's generally held every year in San Francisco. There were, in 2019, there were over 1,500 companies that exhibited at RSA. It's not to say that we don't need cyber. It's just to say that, a lot of these ideas aren't very novel. They're just kind of ideas that are being copied on other people's ideas. And so really, this is like, it's a way of looking at history where you say, I want to be validated. I want to know that there's something in the past that's worked. And then I'm going to make some incremental tweak on top of that that is going to justify the existence of this thing that I'm building as a separate business. But the best companies tend to be pretty singular, actually. When they first come out, they're oftentimes viewed as being kind of strange. No one was building commercial rockets when Elon started SpaceX. You have companies like Palantir that are doing kind of crazy data analytics platforms for large enterprises. You have GitHub putting code in the cloud. You have Facebook doing Real ID and an online social networking platform. You have Flexport doing digital freight forwarding. And then, what we're trying to do at Anduril is build a completely new type of defense company that's rooted around artificial intelligence and autonomy. And, these companies don't have startup competitors, at least early on. And there's, tying back to that human psychology question, a lot of times the founders of these companies tend to be slightly off. They tend to be people that don't seek peer validation. They tend to be the types of people that are, oftentimes picked on or bullied earlier in their lives because they didn't fit in for one reason or another. So, then the question is, how do you find singular companies? What is the kind of mechanism as a founder or an investor that you should use to find these kind of really unique ideas? And I would suggest that the solution here is going back to the future. And I'll explain what that means. If you go back to like the mid-century, which this wasn't unique to the United States, it was also very much the case in Europe. We had these like crazy dreams of the future. We talked about the Jetsons, where we were going to have like this beautiful Earth with flying cars and automated showers and all this really cool stuff. And then you had Star Trek, where money just became like an unnecessary aspect of society. You could just, create things out of atoms that would just, pop up in replicators. You had, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, talking about underwater travel. You had, so many like scientists postulating ideas around anti-gravity. We were dreaming really big, and science fiction was really optimistic. There was this vision of the future that was exciting, and it motivated us in the space race. It motivated the way that we thought about, the existence of life off of the planet Earth. And it was, it led to an increase in interest in STEM professions that led to very rapid scientific progress. Whereas today, I would argue that science fiction is deeply dystopian. The common theme that kind of unites all of these conversations tends to be something along the lines of life will suck and then we'll die. And that has permeated the way that people think about technology in today's world. They kind of get sucked into this super dystopian view and have a hard time envisioning what a future would look like that would be genuinely better than the one that we live in today. So the question that I want to ask, and this is kind of the title of the presentation, is, so what happened to the future? Why do we have this deeply dystopian view that wasn't present, as recently as 30, 40 years ago? There's a way of kind of thinking about this in a quad chart, where on one axis you have definite and indefinite, and on the other axis you have optimistic and pessimistic. So you look at the mid-century United States in particular, you had this definite optimistic view of the world, where we believe that the world will be better for our children than it is for us today. And we also had a plan for how we were going to get there. And then you have the China of today, which is definite and pessimistic, where they say, the world is probably not going to be better for our children than it is for us today. But we're going to have a plan for how to deal with that. We're going to acquire natural resources. We're going to, have exorbitant debt programs that give us access to the things that we need in Africa and in South America and things like that. You have the Europe of present, which is like indefinite and pessimistic, which is saying we don't believe the world will be better for our children, and we don't actually have a plan for what to do about it. So we just choose to kind of generally be pessimistic. And then maybe the worst quadrant of all is where the United States is today, which is indefinite and optimistic. For some completely incomprehensible reason, we believe that the future is going to be better, but we don't really know why. We can't really explain how we're going to get there. And it's incredibly, it's like running on a treadmill. So the kind of framing of this in the historical versus future context is that competition oftentimes emerges from overvaluing history. You know, you look backwards, you say, you know, how has this worked in the past? How can I validate this idea from previous experience? Whereas creation, true creation, emerges from valuing and imagining the future instead. How do you look forward and say, this thing that I'm going to build is going to be unique, and it's going to encourage human flourishing rather than being rooted in a scarcity mindset about competition of resources. And I think this is truly the place where humans can step into the opportunity to be unique. We can step into the opportunity to be value added. We can step into the opportunity to increase the amount of abundance in the world. And these things don't have to be science. There's a lot of different ways to kind of look at this. You know, so often I think founders believe that, you know, they want to build an app that is fairly trivial technically, and that's going to make it really hard for them to succeed because they need some tech barrier to entry. And actually that hasn't proven out to be true from a tech perspective in the last 20 years since the internet was around. There are a lot of super valuable businesses that have very limited technical moats. They were just unique ideas when they first came out, and they were able to win massive market share. And so that is possible. And the real question that you need to ask yourself constantly is really a question about abundance. And that is kind of what I would leave it at. And I think I'm supposed to go into a Q&A session now, but I don't want to click hang up while we're waiting for the next person.
All right, Trae, thank you. I think our video team didn't expect you to finish that early. I think you're the first speaker today, finishing up 4 minutes ahead of time. So apologies for letting you hang in there for a second.
I saw that they were running late, and I didn't want Daniel from UiPath to get stuck with limited time. So wanted to make sure I talked fast enough to resolve quickly.
You did a great job at catching us up and actually being ahead of the agenda. So thank you so much for that. And yes, you are right. So there is going to be a Q&A where you can ask Trae further questions to elaborate more on the concept that he shared. Very, very interesting. I think I love a lot of the concepts that you've mentioned, like from really like asking the why questions, more like first principles reasoning and things like that for imagining the future. So very, very powerful concept that I hope a lot of our audience can benefit from. So thank you very much for being with us virtually at Techsylvania, and thank you for joining the QA session after this as well.
Sure. Thanks for having me.